Hi, it's Josh, and I'm back once again with the Shores of Tripoli. In my first video about this game, I went over the historical background, going through all the history that this game is based on. I did a little unboxing, and then I talked about a lot of interesting points that arose in the discussion of the history and in reading about the history of the game. So that was the first video. This video is going to focus on the solo play of the game. So I'm going to play through an entire solo game, then I'm going to come back and talk about my thoughts about the solo experience. Now, just as a reminder, The Shores of Tripoli is a game designed by Kevin Bertram and published by Fort Circle Games. It is an asymmetrical two-player game in which the US Navy takes on the Barbary pirates in the Mediterranean and in North Africa. It is designed as a two-player game, but it also comes with solo rules so that you can play it as a single player as well. This is going to be my 9th solo play of the game. I've previously played 4 games where I played both sides, sort of playing each side as best as I could, and then I've played 4 other times using the true solo rules. So this is going to be my 5th play of the actual solo rules, but my 9th play in total. I'm not going to attempt to teach the game as I go, rather I'm simply going to play through the game and you can see how the solo play works. In the process, I might spoil kind of the winning strategy that the US player needs to take in order to achieve the assault on Tripoli victory condition. So that's part of the fun, I think, of the game is puzzling through the cards and working out the strategy that's required to win the solo experience. And so some of that might be spoiled in watching this playthrough. On the other hand, it should give you a very good idea of how the game plays. So let's set the game up and get into it, and then I'll come back and talk about the game afterwards. Okay, it is spring of 1801, so let's dive right into it. The American player takes the first turn, and normally if my opening hand contains a specific card called Corsairs Confiscated, then that would be my opening play as the American player to remove these 2 Tripolitan Corsairs from Gibraltar. However, I don't have that in my opening hand, and in fact my opening hand is not a super great assortment of cards for the early game. It's almost all kind of late game cards here. So what I'll do is I'll just discard a victory card that I won't need till very late in the game. And I am going to use that for a basic action to move 2 of my ships. And I'm moving them out of Gibraltar into the naval patrol zone around Gibraltar in order to blockade these 2 Corsairs and prevent them from sailing over to join their friends in Tripoli. However, what that does mean is that I am leaving Tripoli open for the first turn, which isn't great. They get a free pirate action essentially. So that is going to be the first action of the Tripolitan player, is a pirate raid. So let's just make sure. Yes, on the first pirate raid of the game, they're going to play Happy Hunting in order to roll 3 additional dice. So they get to roll their 5 dice for the 5 starting Corsairs, plus 3 more for 8 dice total, and every 5 and 6 is going to give them a gold coin. Well, that's a very lucky roll for me as the American player. They've only got 1 coin out of that. But also, they are going to play Merchant Ship Converted, playable if a Tripolitan pirate raid has just been successful. Place 1 Tripolitan Corsair in the harbor of Tripoli. So they're getting another boat out of the deal anyways. So that is the opening play. They've got their first coin. And now let's move to summer of 1801. For the second play for the Americans here, we are going to, what I need to do here is play Swedish Frigates Arrived to place 2 Swedish frigates in the naval patrol zone of Tripoli. So here comes my Swedish allies. And then that card was played for its event, so it's removed from the game rather than being discarded. Now, the second play for Tripoli here they are going to go to another pirate raid since they have at least 5 ships here in Tripoli still. So out come the 5 Tripolitan Corsairs. And this time, though, I have some Swedish frigates to try to intercept. So they're going to roll 4 dice. And on any 6s, they're going to sink some Corsairs. So let's hope for some 6s. Nothing. So now we have 6 dice to roll to try to gain some treasure. 5s or 6s are going to give coins. Again, only a single coin, so not too shabby for me. Okay, that takes us to fall. And now I need to beef up that Tripolitan security a bit more, I think. So what I'll do is discard a card again when it's a relatively useless early game card in order to move 2 frigates. I'm going to take 2 away from Gibraltar here and move them over to Tripoli. So now we're really blockading that port there. And then the next play from the Tripolitan player is I'm each time kind of going through making sure I'm not missing a card that's supposed to be played. But early in the game is mostly a lot of pirate raids. So once again, their ships are coming out to do a pirate raid. This time, however, I get to roll 4 dice for the Swedes and 4 dice for my American frigates there. And hope for 1 or 2 6s to sink some of those ships. Oh my goodness, that was a terrible result. I got 0 6s. So everyone's rolling terribly to start. Now we're rolling 6 dice again, looking for 5 and 6s to gain some coins. And once again, just a single coin. Not too shabby. And that pirate raid is done. And we move on to winter. Now, at this point, I think what I would like to do is, again, just discard a card. And this time, let's see. Yeah, we'll just discard a card, and this time we're going to build a gunboat in Malta. So let's take one of our gunboats and bring it to Malta. That'll become useful in the future. And moving back to Tripoli, once again, they have at least 5 Corsairs in Tripoli, so they're going to keep on doing their pirate raids. So out they come. I roll my 4 dice for the Swedes, 4 dice for the Americans. Got to get at least 1 6, one would think, at this point. Still nothing. Oh my gosh. Alright. And once again, they get to roll their 6 dice for 5 and 6s for coins. Wow, this is unbelievably bad rolling on all sides. So that takes us to the next year, 1802, spring. The US gets another ship in Gibraltar, and I get to draw 6 more cards, and I'm gonna have to discard 2 so that I have a hand of 8. Alright, we don't need any victory cards yet, so that'll be an automatic discard. And from there, I don't think we need to think about Hamet's army yet. So let's get rid of that. And oh, did I discard too many cards? Yeah, I should have 8 cards, so let's keep that one back. Alright, so back to the Americans. Now, what did we draw? Let's, for the fun of it, launch the Intrepid. So I'm going to roll 1 die and apply the result. I'd ideally like to roll a 5 or 6 here for the best result, and ideally not roll a 1 or 2. Oh, a 2! The raid is a failure! No effect. I was trying to sink at least 1 Corsair in Tripoli here, but that did not work. That card's removed from the game. And we move on to the Tripolitans now. Where are we? We're now in 1802, so make sure I'm doing things in the correct order here again. Oh, the winter of 1801. See, I've already missed something here. The previous action should have been Murad Race breaks out. So I'm just doing this kind of one action too late, but I'm still able to do it, so that's fine. Nothing has really changed in that regard. Or if it is winter of 1801, yep. So move the 2 Tripolitan Corsairs from the harbor of Gibraltar to the harbor of Tripoli. However, my 1 frigate that's standing guard here is going to take a shot at them as they go by. So I'm going to roll 2 dice, hope for a 6 finally. Nope, not so lucky. So they carry on and they sail around to Tripoli to join quite a formidable armada there in Tripoli. So I'm going to have to do something about that. So that card is discarded. Any American frigates? Yes. So they did their interception roll and missed. So now we move on to summer. And I really got to do something about all of these boats in Tripoli here. Should I go ahead and attack the harbor? What are my options here? Should I do an attack? Or should I save those ships? So my options are, I can sail in and do an attack with my frigates here, try to remove a couple of these Corsairs. However, after a naval engagement, I would have to then send my ships to Malta, essentially to restock. So I would leave some free pirating happening here. On the other hand, I could just bring in a couple of my ships for an attack, but that's kind of a wasted action if I only bring in a couple, I think. So what I will do is move up to 4 American frigates. Let me see here. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to just discard a card again. And I'm going to move my remaining 2 frigates to join everybody else in the harbor here to match this force with a strong defense. And then that takes us to the Tripoli turn now. And we still have more than 5 Corsairs here, so now we're coming out with everybody to do some pirate raids. But this time I'm meeting with 2, 4, 6, 8 American dice and 4 of my allies' dice for a total of 12. This should give me a couple of 6s at least, one would think. Okay, 1, 2 6s out of that. I'll take that. And then the remaining 2, 4, 6 ships are going to keep doing their pirate raid thing, looking for 5s and 6s. Ooh, dang, now we're getting some hits. So we got 3 coins out of that deal. So now they got 6 out of the 12 coins that they need for that victory condition. So that was finally a successful pirate raid, unfortunately for me. So moving on to the fall now. Now, what should I do in the fall? Should I build another gunboat? Perhaps? And maybe that's what I'll do. I think I'm going to discard another card. Yep, let's just discard a card and build another gunboat for future battles. And then, once again, did I advance the time to the fall or the winter? That's a good question. I hope we're in the fall. Yep, I guess we are. So let's do our pirate raid again. And once again, we got 2, 4, 6, 8 plus 4. Looking for 6s to sink some of those pirates. Okay, there's 2 more. Take that. And then, with their now 1, 2, 3, 4 remaining ships, we are going to look for 5s and 6s for coins. And that's just a single coin. And now we go to winter. Now, let's see here. It's probably not too early. Is it too early to start prepping for... Yeah, it's maybe a little too early yet to start thinking about getting to Alexandria with somebody. So I think I'm going to move up to 4 American frigates, and I think I'm going to move my 4 frigates, and I'm going to bombard Dern to try to get rid of some of these ground troops here. So I roll 8 dice. And on 6s I can remove ground troops. So, oh my gosh, nothing. Wow. Wow, okay. So these sail back to Malta to restock. And now where are we at? So, we no longer have 5 or more Corsairs in the harbor of Tripoli. So we don't perform a pirate raid. Yeah, so since we don't have 5 anymore, we draw a card for the Tripolitan player and see what happens. Second storms. Select a naval patrol zone that contains at least 1 American frigate. Let me check for the solo rules. Storms and second storms. If there is a naval patrol zone with at least 2 American frigates, which there is not any longer, play immediately. Otherwise, add to the end of the event card line and draw another card. Alright, so we'll draw another card. Troops to Dern. Playable if Hamlet's army has not captured Dern, which is the case. Place 2 Tripolitan infantry in the city of Dern. See, that's why I tried to bombard them to get rid of some of these ground troops. But they have now reinforced it. Okay, that is the end of the year. So we go on to 1803, springtime. Another boat goes to Gibraltar. Draw 6 more cards, and then I have to discard 2. We'll send those to the discard. And here we go. Cool. Now, we are going to start for the US with early deployment. So I'm going to take 1 American frigate from the following year of the year track and place it in any naval patrol zone. So we can send them to Tripoli here to guard that area. And then that is not an event, that's just a standard card, so that goes to my discard pile rather than being removed from the game. Moving over to Tripoli now, let's see, we're in 1803 now. Play if it is 1803, Sweden pays tribute. So, playable if it's 1803 or later, so we've got enter our Swedish frigates in the naval patrol zone of Tripoli. Return the 2 Swedish frigates to the supply. So these, my friends are saying goodbye, heading back to Sweden, and they receive 2 coins out of the deal. Alright, so that's unfortunate. I've lost my allies and a bit of cash. Going on to summertime now. Now, I've got a big navy sitting here in Malta. Should I try to bombard Dern again? Or do I need to blockade Tripoli? As long as there's only 4 Corsairs in Tripoli, I think I'm going to try a big bombardment again. Do I have move up to 4 American frigates? Yes. So I'm going to move up to 4 American frigates, and the gunboats can come with them. So we're all heading to Dern for a bombardment. So now we're rolling 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 10 dice total. I'm going to do 8 blue, then 2 yellow here. Once again, looking for 6s. Looking for at least a couple of 6s. Ooh. Now we're talking. We got 4 6s out of the deal. So 4 of the infantry are removed. And then we sail on back to Malta again. Not too shabby. Moving over to Tripoli, we are going to draw a card because we have fewer than 5 Corsairs in Tripoli. And we don't have the conditions for the storms to come into play yet. So let's see what happens. We have Algerine Corsairs raid, pirate raid with all Corsairs from Algiers. Now there are no Corsairs in Algiers, so we're going to discard this card to either perform a pirate raid or to build a new Corsair, and a new Corsair would bring them up to 5, so that's probably the smart move there. So we'll discard that, bring another Corsair into play. So next time they'll do a pirate raid with 5 ships. Moving on to fall. Now with that in mind, I really need to protect myself from pirate raids. So I think maybe should I do a naval battle? Since I could do the move the 4 frigates again. I need to either move them all into the patrol zone to guard that, or just sail right into Tripoli and see if I can sink 1 or 2 of those. Which seems like not a bad option. Even though I leave the waters undefended after the battle if I sail in with everybody. Well, I can only sail in with 4 of them, so here's what happens. These 4 frigates, plus the 2 gunboats coming along, are going to do battle in Tripoli. Now, at what point does the naval battle for Tripoli card come into play? Let's see. Make sure we're not missing anything on the other side. Play in any attack on Tripoli in 1805 or 1806, so we're not there yet. Okay, so Americans are rolling 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. 8, 9, 10. Tripolitans are rolling 2, 4, 5. So with 5 red dice for the Tripolitans, 6s sink ships or damaged frigates. Wow, Tripoli got 0 6s and only 1 6 from the American side. Unbelievable. So we only sink 1 Tripolitan ship out of that massive naval battle. So these all sail on back to Malta, leaving a single frigate to guard the harbor. Then we go on to winter, and we only have 4 ships in Tripoli instead of 5, so we draw a card. Troops to Tripoli. Place 2 Tripolitan infantry in the city of Tripoli. So they reinforce with infantry. And that is the end of another year. So let's move on to 1804, spring. We'll draw the last 6 cards from the US deck. And I'll have to discard a few cards here. That's the Corsair's Confiscated that I always like to see in my opening hand, but a little late for that, so we'll discard that. And then, let's see, how many more? We need to discard 2 more cards. I'll get rid of Tribute Paid and 1 more. Okay. Alright, these will be my 8 cards. Now, let's see here. What's my first course of action going to be? Let's move up to 4 American frigates. And now this time, let's send them just to the patrol area here. And then we are now in 1804. So what does that mean for cards that Tripoli is playing? Oh, now the second storms can be played, I believe. If there's a naval patrol zone with at least 2 American frigates, play immediately. So now we're going to face a storm in the harbor here. Tripoli is going to roll 1 die for each American frigate. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 total. The first 6 rolled is going to sink a frigate. Each additional 6 will damage it and place it on the following year of the turn track. So they're hoping for 6s. And lucky for me, there are no 6s. So that was good. Good result. The storm, I weathered the storms. Now, summertime, coming back to me. I would like the Tripolitan player to return 2 gold coins to the supply. So I'm taking 2 of my gold coins back. It was getting a little dicey there with only a few coins remaining, so I'm happy to have those. Going back to Tripoli, they don't have 5 Corsairs at this point, so now we're back to drawing a card. Algerine Corsairs raid. So there are no Corsairs in Algiers, so let's use the card then to build another ship in Tripoli. moving on to the fall. And I'm going to take any card from the American discard pile and either place it in my hand or play it immediately. So I'm going to play immediately the card I just played to return 2 more gold coins that were taken back to my supply. 1, 2. And then moving on to Tripoli, now that they have 5 Corsairs there, they can do another pirate raid. Fortunately for me, I have 5 defenders here waiting, so I get to roll 10 dice to try to intercept. Now that we're in 1804, however, do we play US signals? No, not till 1805. Alright, so I'm rolling my 10 dice to intercept. 8, 10. Looking for 6s to sink ships. Okay, we got 3 6s. Now we're talking. Wow. That's outstanding. Now the 2 remaining pirates, you're going to look for 5 or 6s to get coins. Nope. Wow. That was great. And then we go to wintertime. I'm going to play Congress authorizes action to place 2 American frigates on the following year of the year track. So next year I'm going to get 2 more frigates. That card's removed from the game. Tripoli now is looking a little lean on ships. They're going to draw a card. And their card says, Algiers declares war. Place 3 Algerine Corsairs in the harbor of Algiers. So here we go. Now Tripoli has some allies coming into play. But that's the end of the year, so let's move on to the next year. We set to spring. Send these 2 ships to Gibraltar. And then I need to shuffle up my discard and draw 6 cards and discard 2. Now, in these final 2 turns of the game, I'm going to be seeing all of my remaining cards. So now some real careful planning is in order. So I can set myself up for victory in 1806. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And what do we got? Return 2 gold coins. That's a good one to take again, I think. The land battle cards now are going to come into play. Moving Hamlet's army is going to become important. Oh my goodness, okay. Let's just discard Burn to Philadelphia. And what else are we going to discard? Okay, I guess I'm not too worried about the interception rolls at this point. Alright, we'll keep those 8. And now I have to take my first action. Okay, I'm going to move up to 4 American frigates. I'm going to move 1 to Alexandria to set up my army there. I'm going to move 2 to the harbor of Tripoli. And then I'm not going to do the 4th one. I'm just going to leave it at that for now. So moving on then to the Tripolitan player. Now that we're in 1805, let's make sure we're doing things correctly. Alright, so, oh, I forgot about this ally. You know what? Instead of moving, I moved 2 ships to Tripoli. So instead of that, I'm going to move them to Algiers, the harbor in Algiers. Right. Because what's happening now is we're going to play Yusuf Karamanli. In 1801, if it's 1805, play it if they have 1 active ally. And what's going to happen is they're going to pirate raid with the Corsairs from the harbor of Tripoli and the Corsairs from their allies. So everybody's pirate raiding this round. Let's start with Algiers here. I get to roll 4 dice to intercept. Oh, now we're intercepting, so, and it's 1805. So US Signals Books Overboard is coming into play. So we'd have to do the interception roll first. Okay. So let's roll the 4 dice to intercept. Try to see if we can get a 6. Yep, there's a 6 to get rid of one of them. And now the U.S. signal book's overboard, playable after an interception roll that includes an American frigate. Randomly draw one card from the American player's hand and place it in the discard. So I'm going to have to shuffle up my hand and randomly discard one of them. And let's see, we have the Daring Stephen Decatur, playable if you either burn the roll 2 dice instead of 1 and choose a preferred result. Okay, that is probably the best case scenario in terms of cards that I lose from my hand. It's not a terribly important one at this stage. But we also have another pirate raid. Oh, we haven't actually done the pirate raid with these two. So they roll 2 dice looking for 5s and 6s to steal coins. And they got one of them. And then Tripoli's raiding too. Their little group of 2 boats against my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ships. Rolling 10 dice to intercept. And we got 2 6s to sink both of the Corsairs. So much for the Tripolitan Corsairs. Wow. Okay. Now we're on to summer. And things are looking good. I'm going to go ahead and play Hammett's Army Created, playable if it is spring of 1804 or later, and there's at least 1 American frigate in the harbor of Alexandria. Place 1 U.S. Marine and 5 Arab infantry units in Alexandria. So now we got our land force getting ready to march across the Libyan desert and take out some Tripolitan cities. Alright, now what's Tripoli going to do? They are going to draw a card and see what happens. Moroccan Corsairs raid. Pirate raid with all Corsairs from Tangier, but there are none there, so we discard the card to either build a new boat or pirate raid from Tripoli. Obviously, we need to build a new boat. Fall. I'm going to play Hammett Recruits Bedouins, playable if Hammett's army has been created. Place 2 additional Arab infantry with Hammett's army. So boosting the ground infantry force here. And that does not get removed from the game, just gets discarded. And then we move on to Tripoli. They're again going to draw a card to see what happens. We got storms again. So if there's a naval patrol zone with at least 2 American frigates, play immediately. Same deal, roll a die for each frigate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2, 3, 4, 5. The first 6 sinks the frigate, and the additional 6 damages them. And they got 6 to sink one. So that's the first sunk American frigate. If at any point 4 American frigates are sunk, it is game over and Tripoli wins. So they have 1 of the 4 that they need for that. Moving on to winter. Let's see, I'm in Alexandria now. And I don't have the cards to move from there at the moment. Let's just maybe make the Tripolitan player return 2 more coins. I'll grab that. 2 more coins back. And then Tripoli is gonna draw a card, see what happens. The Philadelphia runs aground, playable if there's at least 1 American frigate. Let's see if it's the same for solo rules. Philadelphia runs aground. If there is a frigate in the naval patrol zone of Tripoli, play immediately. Yes, there is. Otherwise, alright. And since we're playing Philadelphia runs aground, along with that, I think we have another card to play. Uncharted Waters. Playable if the Philadelphia runs aground is the active event card this turn. Roll 2 dice and choose the best result. So they're hoping for a 5 or a 6 to sink one of my frigates and replace it with one of their own boats. So, okay, 2 5s, so they obviously keep the 5. Frigate captured. Take the American frigate as sunk. So that, and we have 2 sunk frigates out of the 4 they need for victory. And place 1 Tripolitan frigate in the harbor of Tripoli, so that essentially has been captured. Okay, and that was winter, so now we're in the final year. And now the biggest job of the game is taking the entire remaining deck for the Americans and deciding which 8 cards in total are going to be kept for the final 4 actions of the game. So we have to do this carefully in order to go 1, 2, 3 and set up a victory here. Do I want to keep both victory cards? Probably not. Probably just the Assault on Tripoli victory card is what I'll aim for. I need anything that allows my army to move. So move Hamet's army from Dern to Benghazi is going to be the second step. The first step is going to be moving them from Alexandria to Dern. So where's that card? Move from Alexandria to Dern. Let's see. Maybe keep the take a card from the discard pile and play it immediately. That might come in useful at some point. Any land battle cards are going to be useful. Okay, I don't need that. Don't need that. My goodness. I want the land battle stuff. I don't think I'm going to worry too much about these allies of Tripoli because they haven't been coming up. Yeah. I think those are my 8 cards. Oh yeah, plus I have Thomas Jefferson still. Forgot about him. Okay, so I have 4 actions to do 1, 2, 3 actions worth of stuff. So I have 1 extra thing I can do first before it all kicks off. Do I take the chance or do I just start my march? You know what I could do? I could get the card from a discard pile, and I could take, here's where you really need to know the decks well. Playable if Hamet's army has been created, place 2 additional Arab infantry with Hamet's army. So we'll boost up the army even more before we start marching it across. Alright, now Tripoli. They are still drawing cards to see what happens. Okay, so Tripoli acquires Corsairs. Place 2 Tripolitan Corsairs in the harbor of Tripoli. That was something they really needed. Good for Tripoli. Moving on to summer. Now we start our march. So, move Hamet's army from Alexandria to Dern. Here we come. Along with that, move up to 3 American frigates to the harbor of Dern. Resolve the Battle of Dern. So 1, 2, 3, and I can bring my gunboats and resolve the Battle of Dern. Before that happens, playable at the start of a land battle. Do they play this one right away? Mercenaries desert. Playable if General Eaton attacks Dern. Is the card being played? It is. So, playable at the start of a land battle. Before the battle starts, roll 1 die for each Arab infantry unit. On each 6, the Arab unit deserts and returns to the supply. So we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. Roll 9 dice. On any 6s, I lose some of my infantry. A single 6. Unbelievable. That's a great result for me. Now I do the naval bombardment with 2, 4, 6, 8 dice. Looking for 6s. Three 6s. That's immediately wins that battle. I don't even have to do the ground attack. The boats all go back to Malta. And now I control Dern. Which means now for the Tripolitan action, they're going to play Constantinople sends aid. Playable if Hamet's army has captured Dern, place 1 Tripolitan frigate and 2 Tripolitan Corsairs. Thanks. In the harbor of Tripoli, plus place 2 Tripolitan infantry in the city of Tripoli. So all of a sudden, Tripoli is extremely well defended. Moving on to fall, we got to keep marching now to Benghazi. So move Hamid's army from Dern to Benghazi. Move up to 3 American frigates to the harbor of Benghazi and resolve the battle. So 3 frigates along with my 2 gunboats. And there's no cards to play necessarily. Yeah, actually, I'm going to playable at the start of a land battle. Select 1 Marine infantry unit to roll 3 dice instead of 1 during each round of combat. Cool. Right, so first we do the naval bombardment with 2, 4, 6, 8 dice again, looking for 6s. There's a single 6 this time. And they sail back to Malta. Now my US infantry is rolling 3 dice instead of 1. And then I have 2, 4, 6, 8 Arab infantry, so I'll roll yellow dice for them. And then we have 3 Tripolitan infantry. I'll roll them all together and we're looking for 6s. Alright, Tripolitan's got no 6s, but my Arab infantry rolled 3 6s to immediately end the battle. Dang. Alright. So far so good. It's the next one that's going to be the hard one. Okay, moving on to Tripoli. Oops. They have a lot of ships, so they're going to do a pirate raid. If there are 5 or more Corsairs in Tripoli, perform a pirate raid. So I only have 2 ships to try to intercept with, to roll 4 dice. I got nothing. So they're rolling 6 dice to try to get coins on 5s and 6s. Whoa, they got 3 coins just like that. Fortunately, I've been taking a bunch of them back. Okay. And now, it is the final turn of the game. I am doing Assault on Tripoli. Playable in fall of 1805 or later. Move all American frigates and gunboats to the harbor of Tripoli. Here comes everybody. Move Hamid's army from Benghazi to Tripoli. And send in the Marines, which I've kept here. Playable if Assault on Tripoli is the active event card. Place 3 Marine infantry units in the city of Tripoli. So we got some US Marines joining forces here. Okay, now the big final battle, the big showdown for all the marbles takes place here. The memory card of my face camera just filled up, so my face is gone. Poor you, don't have to look at my face anymore. Alright, what do we got here? I got a bunch of stuff happening now. First of all, we have the Guns of Tripoli, playable during a naval battle in the harbor of Tripoli. The Tripoli player is going to roll an additional 12 dice on the first round of naval combat. But in response, I've got some battle cards to play as well. Preble's Boys, take aim. Playable during a naval battle in a harbor. Each American frigate may roll 3 dice instead of 2. If played during the assault on Tripoli, only roll for the first round of battle. Alright. Let's do this one at a time for the naval combat here. Let's see. I'll do Tripoli first. So they're rolling an additional 12 dice. So 12, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 dice. 8, 16, 20. And 6s are hits. 20 dice. Yikes. Okay, 6s. 6s. 4 6s out of all that. So I'm going to end up losing, I'll take away 2 gunboats and 1 frigate for those 4 hits. But before they depart, I'll fire back in my first round of combat. And with Preble's boys, I'm rolling 3 per frigate. I roll 3 dice instead of 2, so 3 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is 18, 19, 20. Alright, 8, 16. That's funny, they're both rolling 20. 20. Is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 18, 20, yep. Looking for 6s! Okay, I see 4 6s here as well. Look at that. Alright, so how are we taking hits here? I guess 2 hits will be absorbed by the frigate. And then 3, 4, 2 of the Corsairs. We'll remove these casualties. So they've sunk 3 of the 4 ships they need for victory. And since this is the final battle, we continue doing naval battle until one navy is destroyed. Normally it would be a one-shot affair, but not on the final one. So now we're down to 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. 8 blue and 2 yellow against 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 red. Everybody's looking for 6s, so that card's done now, only on the first round. That card's done for the first round. Okay, red scores a 6, the US scores a 6, so each got 1. So we're doing a damaged frigate and a sunk Corsair. Now damaged frigates do remain in the battle, in the final battle here. So we're still rolling 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. 8, 10 versus 3 now. Okay, Tripoli misses, and a single 6 from the Americans puts them down to 2. Alright, so again, misses from Tripoli, 2 hits this time from the US. We'll finish off the final 2 Corsairs. The damaged ship goes back to my supply. And the remaining 4 boats, before they depart for Malta, are going to bombard the ground troops in Tripoli. So now we're rolling 8 dice, looking for 6s to get rid of some of those ground forces. A single 6 will get rid of one of them. Better than nothing. Then they go back to Malta, and now it's strictly the ground troops. Fortunately, I have an advantage with my Marine sharpshooters because all of my US Marines are going to hit on 5s and 6s for each round of combat. So that's a nice deal for me. But it's going to come down to this ground combat, because if I get unlucky and lose the ground combat, I've lost the game. If I win the ground combat, I've won the game. So I'm rolling 4 blue dice, which hit on 5s and 6s. I'm rolling 8 yellow dice, which hit on 6s. And I'm rolling 2, 4, 6, 7 red dice, which hit on 6s. No 5s or 6s with the US infantry. So much for that. But 3 6s from my Arab units, 2 6s from the Tripolitans. So Tripoli loses 3. I lose 2. And so now I'm rolling 4 blue, 6 yellow against 4 red. Looking good. It is looking good. Okay, another single red and 3 of mine. So Red takes out 1. Oh wait, 5s and 6s! This is way better than I thought. I actually remove 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units. And just like that, it is game over with a US victory, with quite a few troops remaining in the end. So there you go. That is a solo playthrough of the Shores of Tripoli. Alright, a couple of quick notes before I dive into my thoughts. First of all, should let you know, I guess, that I did receive this game for free from the designer in order to make a video about it. I didn't receive any other compensation besides a free copy of the game, but just to have that in the back of your mind as I go through my thoughts. And I also, before I continue, want to really thank my Patreons, in particular my higher tiered supporters, Joanna and Paul. I'm really grateful for your help. And to everybody who has taken the time to support me on Patreon, I am extremely grateful for your kindness. So, let's talk about the Shores of Tripoli as a solo experience. And first of all, I will say in the game that we just played there, I was given a bit of an easier time of it, given the fact that only one of Tripoli's allies came up during the course of the game. So I didn't have to spend a lot of cards and resources sort of putting down any allies that happened to pop up along the way to also add additional threats to the whole piracy aspect of the game. Normally I would have to be dealing with more Barbary Corsairs that were coming up in other parts of Northern Africa there, but I didn't really have to deal with much of that at all during the game, so that allowed me to focus my resources on just getting into Tripoli and getting as much power as I can into the ground armies and getting in there and capturing Tripoli. So that was a bit of a easy thing that came up for me, despite some really atrocious die rolling that was happening. Now, regarding strategies and ease of play, I heard a few members of the Dice Tower talking about the game. They were talking about the two-player experience, which is something that I have no experience with. I haven't played the two-player at all. And they were saying that it felt really impossible to win the game as the US player because the Tripolitan player has a much more straightforward path to victory in terms of just trying to do a lot of pirate raids to get coins while kind of bolstering defenses to make the job of the US player more difficult. Now, this is true for inexperienced players. I'm going to talk about some stats from my now 9 plays of the game, but it is certainly true that as you are coming into the game, there's a lot more complexity that needs to be learned for the US strategy than for the Tripolitan strategy. So for new players, yeah, it is going to be easier for the Tripolitan player. However, with experience, I have a feeling, just based on my solo plays, that it actually becomes easier for the US player once they have learned their cards and how to use them and set up the path to Tripoli. I think that if dice are generally in the favor of the US, well, I guess all things being even, I think the US player might have a bit of an easier time of it. And here's some stats to show why that's the case. So, talking about all game stats for all 9 of my games, like I said, 4 of them were playing both sides, 5 of them now were playing true solo rules. And the very first game I played was where I played both sides, one against the other, and somehow that came up as a US win, even though at the time I had no idea what I was doing or how to set things up properly with the cards. But I have a suspicion that I messed something up because I have on record that the game ended in spring of 1806, whereas every other game that I've played ended in either fall or winter of 1806 in those final 2 turns of the game, and none of the other games ended that early, so I feel like I might have messed something up in that first play of the game. Because following that first game, the 3 games I played after that were all Tripolitan victories, and what's interesting to note is that in each of those games, Tripoli achieved a different winning conditions. So Tripoli has 3 different winning conditions. One of them is to loot all 12 coins. One is to sink 4 American frigates, and then the final victory condition is to defeat the US ground army as it kind of comes into Tripoli. And in the following 3 games after that first US victory, it was a situation where Tripoli won by each of those three conditions, which was kind of interesting. So that was the first 4 games, and then in the following 5 games, they were all either victories for the US or in one instance a draw. So once I figured out the US strategy, basically Tripoli didn't win after that. They did achieve a draw, like I said, where neither side achieved their victory conditions, but in the remaining 4 games the USA was victorious. So I think that goes to show that once you are very familiar with the game, with the cards, with how it all plays, I think the US maybe does gain an edge after being the more difficult side to learn initially. And talking about learning the game, if I look at just the true solo stats, so the 5 games where I played strictly by the true solo rules, the first 2 were losses, and then I've won all 3 games since then. So it shows that I was kind of learning the system initially, trying to figure out how it all works together, and then once I kind of got it figured out, then it was victory every time after that. So talking about the US side and their path to victory, they have 2 victory conditions that they can work towards. One is the assault on Tripoli, as you saw in the game I played, where I essentially came in and captured Tripoli. The other is kind of a series of things that need to be achieved, which I'll talk about shortly after I look at this first victory condition here. Essentially, to capture Tripoli, the only way to get there is to land troops in Tripoli by first gathering a force in Alexandria, Egypt, then capturing Dern from there, then capturing Benghazi, and then finally getting to Tripoli, like you saw in the game that we just played. So it requires a bit of a setup preparation phase to get to that. Basically the final year of the game is when all that has to come into place. So in the first 2/3 of the game, I would say the US is all about barricading harbors and playing whack-a-mole with Tripoli's actions. So Tripoli can obviously get out with their pirates, perform pirate raids, and take a couple of coins, and then the US player can play a card that says get 2 coins back, and then maybe they'll go out pirate raiding again, and then the US player can play their card that says play a card from the discard pile to get 2 more coins back. So for every time that the Barbary pirates are looting and plundering coins, the US player has this card in hand to try to get some of them back again. Similarly, the Tripolitan player has the ally cards that bring the allied forces into play, whereas the US player has cards that we didn't see come into play during our game, where you can play a card, sail some ships to the harbor of the ally, and then just eliminate the corsairs of the ally that are in that harbor. So as these forces pop up, you're playing whack-a-mole by moving ships over there and getting rid of them again. So the other thing is, too, the Tripolitan player has that special card that allows them to randomly discard a card from the US player's hand, but the US player has that card that says go to your discard pile and take any card out of your discard pile. So even if they lose an important card, as long as they have that in hand, they can get that card back again. So it seems that a lot of the US players' actions are geared towards negating everything that Tripoli tries to do, which I haven't played 2-player, but I imagine in a 2-player game, it might feel frustrating as the Tripolitan player to every time you're doing something, you're grabbing coins only to have them taken back. You're getting allied ships out there only to have them removed. And so I'm not sure emotionally what that would feel like as that player. I guess once you realize that that's part of the game, you have to build your strategy around it, but initially it could be kind of frustrating perhaps. But in the case of both players, you really do have to know both your own deck of cards and your opponent's deck of cards and how they interact with each other. It's one of those games where until you have that knowledge of the card decks, you're just going to be sort of swinging in the dark and playing with not a lot of information. Now, fortunately, there's not a lot of cards to learn. Each player only has 21 action cards, as well as 6 battle bonus cards. So it's a pretty small deck that you're working with, so there's not a ton to learn, but it is important to know the cards that are in both decks in order to play well. And in fact, what's kind of interesting is that the biggest strategic decisions that are being made by a player is which cards to discard at the beginning of each season. So you're drawing up past your hand of 8 cards typically, and then you're discarding down to your hand of 8, and then using those cards to perform actions for your turn. And that discarding is where I find myself pausing to think the most, as you noticed in the game there. There's a fair bit of time spent trying to decide which cards I want to have in hand based on where I am in the game and how many turns are left, and whether or not I'm going to be shuffling up my deck and seeing it again, or if it's a late game, I won't be seeing the cards again. And then because there are so few cards, and you do see each of them twice typically, but that whole discarding cards is kind of the biggest decision process. Now, as far as the Tripolitan strategy, the Tripolitan player only has one offensive strategy to pursue because of their 3 victory conditions. 2 of them are about just building up defensive resources, the ones that relate to sinking US frigates and winning land battles. The Tripolitan player is not going to really go on the offensive to attack US shipping necessarily, although it might be an interesting strategy to try to play out at some point. I don't know if that would end well for Tripoli or not, but basically what they're doing is they're trying to build up their resources so that when the US player attacks, they can then hopefully sink some US frigates and maybe even win the land battle to win the game. So that leaves only the plundering coins as really the only offensive strategy that can be pursued by the Tripolitan player, which is also why it is easier for new players to play as the Barbary pirates, because it's pretty straightforward. They're just kind of getting out there and doing pirate raids and trying to get coins as much as they can. Now, getting back to the card management there, again, the kind of biggest decision-making process, there are a maximum of 24 turns or 24 seasons in an entire game. And in my experience, like I said, most games will last 23 to 24 turns. In the first 16 turns, you're going to see all 21 of your action cards, and then you're going to take up your discard pile, like you saw, shuffle them up, and then in the last 8 turns, you're going to see all of your remaining cards again, except for the ones that you have previously discarded because you use the actions on them rather than you discarding them to play a generic action. It is cool that the cards have these multiple uses where you can use them. In the case of the US player, you can use them to build a gunboat or to move a couple of frigates on the board. In the case of the Tripolitan player, you can build a corsair or you can do pirate raids. So cards are never completely useless. You can always do something useful with them. And you can also save the card, the action on the card, for later use by using the generic action if it's early in the game, because you know you're going to shuffle up the card and get it back again if you haven't removed it from the game for the action on the card. However, because there are so few cards, only 21 action cards on each side, there's not a lot of wiggle room to play with various strategies. You saw that as the US player, I had to build up a very specific sequence of events to set myself up for victory, and there really isn't a lot of other options to how that can play out. Because you have such a small deck and you're going through it twice, you're very much, I think once you learn the cards, you're following a bit of a formulaic endgame in particular. Like I said, the first 2/3 of the game is more about kind of keeping down the Tripolitan player and getting yourself set up for that end game rush on Tripoli. And then on the other side of things, from the Tripolitan standpoint, again, there's not a ton of wiggle room for strategic playing around because, like I said, you mostly are just pirate raiding to grab coins, and other than that, just trying to build up your forces to repel the attacks of the US player. So this game does sacrifice longevity in order to bring a couple of things to bear. So first of all, it is very tied to the history, which, having taken the time before I started playing the game to read up on the history and research it, I really appreciated that aspect. If somebody hadn't taken the time to learn the history and really didn't know what any of these specific cards or actions or what they represented were, I could see them losing some of the enjoyment of the game because it is so very closely tied to the history. Now, it does play a bit with alternate history in terms of that land force moving on from Dern and continuing west towards Tripoli. In real life, once Dern was captured, that kind of resulted in some negotiations that led to peace treaties, and they didn't actually keep marching on through other cities. But because the game is so tied to the historical theme, it doesn't leave open a lot of other options for exploring different things that could happen. The other thing is just the sheer simplicity of the game. It is very rules light. It is a very approachable game once you've played it a couple times to learn the cards and how they work. It is a very easy game to learn, which again I appreciate a great deal. I wouldn't have played this game if it had been a very complex war game, but because it was simple to learn, quick to play, it did allow me to dive into it and really immediately get to the enjoyment of the game. So I appreciate the simplicity of it, but again, because of the simplicity, that does affect the replayability of the game. Now that I have 9 solo plays under my belt, I don't feel a great need to play the game anymore. Although I could see it coming off the shelf again once I've had a break from it for a while. And one thing I would like to explore a little bit is the fact that in all of my solo games, in fact, I think in all of the US victories, they were all victories with the Assault on Tripoli victory condition. Whereas I would love to try playing a game where I specifically work towards the Treaty of Peace and Amity victory condition. Now, to achieve that victory, we need a few things in place. First of all, it has to be fall of 1805 or later. There can be no Tripolitan allies in play, so all those allied ships that pop up have to have been gotten rid of. The city of Dern has to be captured, but you don't have to go further than that to Benghazi or Tripoli. And there can be no Tripolitan frigates in the harbor of Tripoli either. And that's kind of the tricky one right there, because once you've reached a certain point in your progress towards Tripoli, the solo bot is going to bring at least 1 frigate into play. And they're not so easy to get rid of because there are 1 to 2 cards in the American deck that specifically target a frigate, but otherwise you will have to do naval battles, and then in that case the Tripolitan player can, when they're taking casualties, can get rid of their corsairs rather than their frigate. So you have to be a little bit lucky in order to have the card to play to directly attack the frigate and then roll well enough to sink the frigate in order to have that victory come about. But I would like to maybe play the solo rules to see if I can pull off that specific victory condition. The other thing is I would like to play both sides some more and see if I can pull off more wins for Tripoli now that I am at this point where the US seems to win pretty much every single game. So it would be kind of fun to play around with Tripoli and see if I can get back to a victory with them again. But yeah, that solo win condition in particular, I feel like is a little bit more luck-based due to having to get rid of that frigate. Now, with all this card management stuff, obviously a certain amount of luck comes into play with which cards happen to come up at which specific times. Like I said, I had an easy time of it in my solo play because I didn't have to deal with a lot of allies coming up. It just the way the cards played out in that particular game. Mostly though, because you are going to see your whole deck of cards twice in the course of 24 turns, did I say there were? Yeah, 24 turns. Because of that, the luck of the draw isn't a huge deal. Once you learn how to manage your cards and what to discard, it's not a big deal. The biggest, obviously, by far the biggest luck-based aspect of the game is all the dice rolling, and that is a very big aspect of the game. Most of the time you're just chucking buckets of dice looking to roll 6s, or in the case of Pirate Raid specifically, you were trying to get 5s and 6s, but it does create a lot of weight on the luck of the die rolls, which for some people is going to be problematic. For me, well, it was a bit of a negative throwback to the terrible combat system of a game called Age of Mythology, the board game from 2003. I still remember that game being about throwing buckets of dice, looking for sixes as well, and spending a fair bit of time coming up with variants to fix that system. But in the Shores of Tripoli, it worked. I actually found all the dice rolling exciting, and I think that's partly because it was a solo play, so you need that roll of luck to come into play. Otherwise it's going to be just a straight up no luck puzzle game, and once you've solved it, you solved it, which happens to a certain extent once you know the cards, but there is still the luck of the dice coming in to affect things. And really, if things were more deadly, if you were looking for 5 and 6s on all your rolls, then that's just going to really throw out the whole balance of the game. You're going to have ships just sinking right and left, and it's really going to mess up everything that's going on in the game. So you can't have the combat be too deadly, and in that sense, it is historically accurate. They weren't just sinking ship after ship, but a single ship being captured or sunk could be a big deal and could be a bit of a game changer. Where the roll of the dice could be more problematic, again, maybe, I'm just guessing, is in the two-player game. I don't know if that's something that could be a source of frustration for a player who's doing well with their cards, but the dice aren't coming up with sixes for them. I don't know if it's more problematic in the two-player game. Like I said, I don't have any experience with the two players. I would love to come back with a third video where I've played a bunch of two-player games and I can come back and talk about the true two-player experience, because that's really where the heart of the game is in the two-player play. Unfortunately, well, first of all, I mean, in an ideal world, I could find a game opponents, teach them the game, and we could sort of duke it out. But unfortunately, because of the way that my personal life really fell to pieces a year ago, just before the pandemic hit, I actually have not played a game with another adult in over a year now. So the chances of being able to play this with somebody anytime soon are pretty slim. The other problem is, if I were to teach the game to somebody and play it with them, I would absolutely crush them no matter which side I played, until we had played 2 or 3 games, because that's just the nature of this game. If you know the cards and you know how it all interacts together, you're just going to crush your opponent who doesn't know those things. Where things would get really interesting, though, is if you have 2 experienced players going at it, and that's an experience that, as much as I would like to have with the Shores of Tripoli, I just don't see happening in the near or even the very far future. Here's what this game did give me, though. Like I said, like a lot of people, my year has been absolutely hellish. Like, I mean, people who watch my channel know and are maybe getting tired of hearing me whine about it, but I basically lost my wife and my loved ones, who were my gaming components, all at once a year ago. And so while I have played the occasional kids game with my boys over the past year, I haven't been able to experience my favorite hobby of board gaming. It's just something that, when I lost those people from my life, it became a very real possibility that this was going to be a hobby that I lost at the same time. But having dove into the Shores of Tripoli, it gave me a feeling again of exploring a board game, enjoying the strategy, chucking some dice, playing some cards, and gave me such a great feeling that I was back in this hobby again, that I've been missing out on these past 12, 13 months. And it was a real joy, even though I'm not a solo player, because the game was simple enough and quick enough for me to sit down and just spend an hour or so playing. It allowed me to once again enjoy this hobby that I've loved for basically my whole life, and definitely it's been something that I've been missing, obviously. So the Shores of Tripoli gave me something a lot greater than I had anticipated that it would, and for that I really can't thank Kevin Bertram enough. So that was basically my experiences as a solo player with the Shores of Tripoli. Do let me know any thoughts that came up. I'd love to continue the discussion if you have anything you'd want to add. And who knows, maybe someday in a better future, I'll come back and talk about the 2-player version of the game. Oh my gosh, I am so glad somebody took the time to watch this video. If you could just do me one more favor and consider giving me a thumb up, maybe subscribe to my channel, or share the link to this video with somebody who you think would enjoy it, I would really appreciate that. Cheers. Barb, I have previously played the game 4 times, in which I played both sides as and talking about the biggest strategic really only has one offensive strategy to all the dice roll where I could find a game and then the